Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics from the Governor's Mansion in Jefferson City, Missouri. We are joined by the 57th Governor of Missouri, Governor Parson. Thanks for the time.
Good morning, Scott. Glad you're in here.
So this week, you, at this desk, signed an executive order saying that you were going to not comply with some of the federal government's COVID mandates. Tell folks what that actually means, just a guy swinging a hammer today.
Yeah, I think the big thing is I think the misunderstanding of this is, one, we had to figure out what could we do, you know, and you had to know what those regulations were. If they were going to go down the OSHA rule, well, what is that rule going to look like? So to even be able to file a lawsuit, to work with the Attorney General, we had to get some of that information. I think we finally know a little bit what's in there. I think we know supposedly they're going to drop that here in the next couple of days. If they do, I think there's a tremendous amount of pushback, so I don't know if they were or not. But I think the main thing is we're trying to say is, look, the federal government does not have the right under the Constitution to do any sorts of mandates on the state levels to state citizens. We don't believe they have the right to do that healthcare side of it, to be able to do that. It's never been done before. And then when you try to go OSHA, there's nobody in this country that doesn't understand that that's a far reach of how you're going to try to implement something. And I think as soon as that comes out, whether it's us, whether it's Florida, whether it's Texas, whether it's Iowa, you just name them. There's going to be half the states in the United States are going to file lawsuits against this. And our biggest hope is, one, we get it in the right court. The last thing you want is on the West Coast, you know, to lose there first. So there's a little bit of strategy to that. And then just to put a stay on it until we can have a chance to fight our battles with it.
You know, in my gut, it looked like a lot of big companies were already pretty, well, not making folks, but they were pushing pretty hard to get vaccinated.
Right.
Looked like that was working. When the president gets involved, it looks almost political. I'm not sure that he actually helped get folks vaccinated.
He didn't hurt. He didn't help at all. Look, in the state of Missouri, people are getting vaccinated every day by the tune of about 10,000 people a day, and has been, long before there was ever a federal mandate. Now it's almost the vice versa. Now you got people digging in more that's not going to do it because you're trying to put a mandate on people. And you know how people are in Missouri. Anybody that's been around here any length of all. You know, you ask them to do something, they're pretty good about taking a thought and saying, okay, let me think about that. But if you start trying to make somebody do this, and for the CEOs and the businesses out there, COVID-19 is going down. Delta variant's going down in this state. You know, at a very fast pace, it's going down. Hospitalization's going down. And, you know, people are back out. Crowds are happening in stadiums and all this. And it's not what everybody made it out to be. Not to say it's not serious, because it is a very serious thing. People can still die from COVID-19. But the point of it is, let people make a decision. They're making it. The vast majority of the people in this state has had a vaccine. And if you would even count the herd immunity in there, the numbers are pretty, I think, pretty high that people have went through this process. We just got to keep working on it. But mandates is not the way to go.
I've heard some folks at in the state legislature here say they want to make companies not be able to, you know, make their employees be vaccinated. Boy, to me, the party that supported business, that sounds a little odd coming from them. Will that happen in Missouri? You
know, Scott, I don't know. I don't know what the legislators do. They're going to have a chance. You know, I mean, there's been a lot of them, you know, hit up about we want a special session, we want a special session. That's great to say that, but what is your outcome of a special session? What is your outcome going to be in January and February? Now, everybody's going to have a chance to come up here, and which I think is the right way to go. Because if you go back and look at the history of vaccines, let's say it's smallpox, let's say it's measles, whatever it might be in the state, it was a legislative action that created that. So everybody in the state of Missouri had a due process. They had representatives up there, they had senators. They haven't had that with COVID-19. All you've simply had is a president saying we're going to do this without going through Congress or what I would say due process for everybody.
If you have, though, the Democrats as party of more government services, the Republicans the party of business, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. If the Republicans aren't the party of business, it's going to be kind of lonely for business owners in this state, ain't it?
Well, I think so. And then I think you look at it, you know, and I'll give an example of a couple that I know that owns a nursing home. And let me just walk through just to say that for a minute. Okay, you got the people that built the nursing home. It's on their land. It's their property. They built it. They've been in business. People trust them, take care of their loved ones. And then you have the employee that goes to work there, that he has to decide whether I'm working there, whether I'm not, what do I want to fall under, what regulations. And then you have the patient that's in there. So who does the Constitution protect when you look at it from that scenario? Now, it's easy to pick one of the above. It depends on whose side you want to be on. But the Constitution doesn't say who a business owner is, who an employee is, or who a patient is. They all have rights under the Constitution. So I think we got to be very careful how we move in that process as a one-person governor or a one-person president. That's why I think the legislative body needs to be engaged on this issue.
Well, Governor, the state teachers database was hacked by a Post-Dispatch reporter. it seems confusing. What do you say to like a logger in Ripley County? What could you tell him about what's going on if he reads it and he doesn't quite understand what happened?
Yeah. Well, you know, again, I got to be a little careful because this is under investigation. Sure. So I will speak kind of what I know of at the beginning of it. I think the first question has to be asked, why would you even be doing that? Yeah. Why would anybody, whether it's the media, whether it's the private sector, why would you be trying to get in a system? What was the purpose of that? So I think that's the first question you need to ask. The second thing is if you were to go into it and you've seen there was a opening there, you know, or whatever, however they want to describe it, as you got into the system, you know, why would you simply not just says, hey, you got a problem here, you need to fix it? Why would you remove Social Security numbers from the system? And nobody has the right to go do that. You may be going there and see a flaw in it, and I get that, but still I think the question has to be asked, why'd you do it in the first place? What was the motive behind that? And then why would you take anybody's personal information? Nobody has the right to do that. And I think that's probably the biggest, I think, the sticking point to this whole deal. It'd been one thing if you'd went in there and you really was doing it for the right reasons, quote, what they would like to put the spin on it, that, hey, we're just trying to help. Well, why would you take somebody's Social Security number out there if he's really trying to help? What was the purpose for that?
It really becomes a surprise to many folks that the Postal Dispatcher is trying to help your administration. That'd be a pig in a poke. Now, I don't know hacking. I'm a simple hillbilly. I can barely work that iPhone. My daughter has to help me with it sometimes. But if they do, if there's an investigation, of anything like this, and it comes out maybe a state employee helped them, would you advocate they be prosecuted as well?
Most certainly. If there's anybody involved in this, would. You know, I think what you got to think of, this is against the law to do this. It doesn't matter whether it's the Post-Dispatch or whether it's a private citizen. It's one thing to go in there and see that, but it's one thing to take people's information. The law's pretty clear on that. And, you know, it depends what she's going to use that information for. And we don't know that. That investigation's still going on today of how that's going to be. And I don't know who all's involved. That investigation should, and even whose Social Security numbers. And I'll be honest with you, even if it ever happened, I don't even know that it happened at this point, you know, and we're still working on that. So again, there's an investigation in there of whether this even really did happen the way it said that it happened, or whether it didn't, but that's what the investigation's about.
You know, just an error, and maybe this is just the hick in me, but it just seems a little bit like the folks that overwhelmingly elected you about a year ago, I don't think they elected you for your IT skills. It just feels like there's a hint of elitism in some of this stuff. And maybe it's because you're not what they call Obama, was he a community organizer? Maybe it's because you had a real job or something. And it just feels a little hint in some of those highfalutin ivory towers in St. Louis, a hint of elitism about how they talk about this.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm going to be careful what I say. And I'm no computer expert. I'll be the first to admit that. There's a lot of people out there that are. But here's the one thing I will tell you. Why in the world would the Post-Dispatch, I'll just say them, and I will say some of the other media outlets that all work together in conclusion with what their stories are going to be, why would they not want an investigation? Why would they not want to know the truth and let the people know the truth of what happened? But they pretty well spun the story from day one that it was a right click. Well, trust me, it's much more than a right click, because you got to talk about decoders and all these kind of things that were used. And totally misleading the public, but I don't know if that's anything unusual when you talk about some of those people like that or what they're doing. But again, let the investigation happen and let's see what happens.
Talk about a real disaster. You down in southeast Missouri in Fredericktown, I mean, just devastated. That co-op building is a real source of pride for everybody in southeast Missouri. Tell folks what you saw down in Fredericktown.
You know, I'm going to tell you the thing that I remember the most, and I remember whether it was Jeff City, whether it was Eldon, whether it was the floods, I'm going to tell you the one thing that will always come to the forefront when you go to these areas is everyday people out there working, helping one another, being good neighbors. We were at a house yesterday, and there was 2 or 3 heavy pieces of equipment over there, and literally the guy said, this belongs to farmer such and such, this belongs to a construction company, and people really going in there to help one another. I'm just thankful that nobody was injured, nobody lost their lives, because if you go down there and look at this devastation, I guarantee you will look back and say, I can't believe somebody didn't get killed during this whole time. But I think the devastation as Mother Nature, as you know, is quite a wrath sometimes when you go down there and see that. And to really talk to I had a chance to talk to one family down there yesterday, one of the highway patrolmen lost his house. And I got to talk to his kids a little bit, which they were kind of teenagers, a little older than that, one of them was. But kind of hear from their perspective was pretty good about, you know, what they felt and how they feel today. But it's, you know, as far as the material stuff goes, that can all be replaced. You can fix all that.
I saw you down there with Caleb Jones. You're going to be with those folks till they get
I
back on their feet?
I was hoping you didn't make that public, but anyhow, here we go on that. No, Caleb Jones, his dad, you know, has been close friends for a long time of mine, long before in the old days as sheriff, when Caleb Jones was a little kid, and he hasn't changed much since then. He's still a kid on that. But he was down there. Yeah. The co-op guys were back out on doing their jobs the same night, and literally I think they only had 1 or 2 trucks available, and there was all kinds of resources come in there to help. So my hat's off to people in southeast Missouri. But you know, you come from that part area, you know those are hardworking people down there, are going to help one another and are good neighbors, and you've seen that, yes, Steve. First class down there.
Go to showmissouri.com, see the history of each county, and we'll be right back after this.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads, because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Your energy needs are changing. That's why at Ameren, Missouri, we're not waiting on the future. We're building it with the Smart Energy Plan, advancing thousands of projects across the state, helping reduce emissions through cleaner energy sources, boost reliability with self-healing equipment, and better withstand storms with new composite poles. Moving Missouri forward and bringing us all a little closer together. That's energy at work.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics from the state capitol, the governor's office here in Jeff City. Governor, thank you for sticking with us.
No, glad to be here, Scott.
A couple things in schools. I saw that the School Board Association of Missouri pulled out of the national one. The national one had gotten, boy, it seemed like it'd gotten real far afield from what someone in Ripley County schools would be for.
Yeah, most certainly.
And I saw you congratulated them.
Yeah. You know what? I thought that was a bold move on their part. The first really education entity that I know of that really just stood up and said, look, we're going to take care of our school board members in our state. We're proud of our school systems. We can take care of ourselves, federal government. We don't need the FBI in here. We don't need the Department of Justice in here. And I'll be honest with you, and I was in law enforcement 22 years, they're not coming anyhow. No. All they're going to do is they're going to compile information on somebody that turns somebody in and says, hey, there's this radical person or this person that went to a school board meeting, and who are they to judge whether those people are? Parents have a right to go to a public entity and be able to say their piece in front of a public school board. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, it just felt like the education establishment, and even in Missouri, which I've been a promoter of, hasn't done a lot to speak to parents in a while. This may be the first real bold thing to say, hey, we understand. We understand. I thought that may be a more important thing than people realize for education.
I don't think there's any doubt. You know, there's going to be a good side to this, too. I think when this is all said, people understand how important the school board election is today, where they didn't 2 years ago. And you're going to see much more people involved in those things. That's a good thing. That's a good thing you start paying attention to that. And I think with everything that's been on, all the controversial pieces that's going on in the schools, people are starting to pay attention to that. But the point of it is the federal government has no business in that. You're basically saying every law enforcement agency in the state of Missouri can't handle this situation. We don't need the federal government in here, and frankly, the only reason they're coming in here is for politics. It has nothing to do with enforcement, and I think most people know that.
Your Attorney General has been filing a bunch of lawsuits against folks. One of them is to get the mask off kids' faces. Now, I did a phone call to Neelyville, where I went to school. They don't have a mask policy. They haven't lost any children. Wheatland, where you went to school, they don't have a mask. They haven't lost any kids. How is school districts like Neelyville and Wheatland so much smarter and handle this so much better than places like Rockwood? That's a disaster.
You know what? I think you've seen Jefferson City, I think, did away with theirs. I think there's other people. Look, the problem is people are really starting to look at the science part of this and keeping all the political side out of it. You know, these schools are getting along fine. They've been in there for the last 2 years. The vast majority of schools have been open. They haven't had problems during this time. And I think if anybody would be willing to give it, you know, a just look, if you find out what a school that hasn't been using a mask date versus one that has, you know, and look at that data situation on that. But look, it's time to let kids be kids. You know, we know that this variant is going down. We know it's going down very rapidly. And we know that we're not having problems in the school system that everybody predicted we would have, as they have on this whole COVID-19 situation. The predictions have always been much, much greater than what really happened, and I think we're seeing that now. I just think, you know, these kids, at some point, you're going to have to let them be kids, and you're going to have to let them learn. I don't think you can keep them in a mask all the time.
You've served in the House, the Senate. You've been a big proponent of public schools and public education. You're a product of public education, as am I. I don't think some of these folks realize the damage they're doing and the bonds they're breaking to that, because let's be honest, the reason there's not greater reforms that public school folks advocate against is because of rural Republican legislators. I don't think they see the damage they're doing to that relationship.
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. I think when you look at different pockets of the state, whether it's St. Louis, whether it's Kansas City, whether it's Columbia or Springfield, I think there was a bond between all of that that's going to be on shaky grounds for a while. Of how they're going to move forward in this, you know, and you're just right. For the most part, rural schools do a good job of doing education. Yeah. They really do.
I agree with
you. Know, it's when you get in the political aspect of what you're seeing now. You know, I'll just mention the St. Louis school system. All of a sudden, when you start talking, we're going to mandate vaccines, that's going to be problematic. You know, when they start trying to do that. You know, because it's not their job to decide the health care of that kid. It's mom and dad's decision. What's the best thing for that kid as far as health care goes.
Speaking of folks moving forward, this state's getting back to work. 3.8% unemployment. Got to be proud of that.
Well, we're proud of that. I mean, we're proud of that. You know, and I will also say at the time, you know, industry, we're expanding in the state. During COVID-19, we were one of the very few states that actually expanded the footprint of our businesses. Over $2 billion worth of investments in our state in there. You know, we rank number 2 in the United States right now in apprenticeship programs because of the workforce development pieces we're doing, the infrastructure pieces. Those things all pay off. But the one problem we got is we got to get people back to work. We still got 140,000 job openings in the state of Missouri, our unemployment rate. But what that's all going to come to, eventually you're going to have to start cutting off some of the aid that's going to a lot of people. And I'm not saying this. If somebody needs help, I think everybody in the state of Missouri wants to help people that really need help. But you got way too many people that take advantage of the system. And when you start talking about rental assistance, utility assistance, all the money that comes from the federal government, we want that to go to the hands of the people that need it. But we don't want to make it where it's a deterrent for people going back to work.
Governor, last thing I want to ask you, you're a football fan.
All right.
Western side's been a little struggling, been on a good run, but Eastern side, the Rams lawsuit's probably been more entertaining than the Rams football team was the last several seasons. There's talk that maybe this disaster of a situation ends in St. Louis being offered a team. If they get offered an expansion team, is that a conversation you'd sit down with the folks in St. Louis, with the NFL, and talk about how to make that happen?
Well, first of all, I'm a sports-minded guy. So, I mean, if you had a chance to bring an NFL team to the state of Missouri, no matter where it is, you know, I think that's always something you sit down at the table and find out, hey, could you put this together, and is it good for the state, you know, at the same time. You know, so I think you're always open to that. Major League Soccer, whether that comes there, you know, this is just a sports-minded state. Most people here have stake in someone. And, you know, from when I grew up, as you well know, you know, it's the St. Louis Cardinals and the Kansas City Chiefs. You know, that's just the way it was.
Remember your office. You had both those helmets up in your Senate office back in the day.
So, I mean, people just at high school sports, you look at high school sports, the universities, you know, it's a big deal in the state of Missouri. So if we get an NFL team in there, sure, we'll be glad to sit down with the NFL and see what it is. If it's a good thing for the state of Missouri. But, again, we don't quite want it to end the way it has first time.
Governor, I want to ask you, you signed a law into effect that had a lot of criminal justice reform in it. Right. It had the sheriffs get paid differently than they previously did. That's had some controversy with some of the commissioners, folks that you know very well. It's going to be interesting to see how the courts settle that out. I know that you understand what it's like to sit before 3 commissioners as a sheriff and talk about your budget. Right. But there's another piece in there. You signed a piece that allowed folks to go try to vacate convictions. If prosecutor thought this office messed up. Right. The highest profile one has been Kevin Strickland. Right. Boy, it seems like there's a pretty compelling case to get attention for that guy. I know that everybody that applies to your office for a pardon, I'm sure they truly feel like they have a compelling case. Strickland has caught folks' eye a little more. You've said you're working towards that. As that process moves on, do you feel like that process thus far has been what you intended when you signed the bill, and do you give him any extra time because of the situation?
Well, I think it's the process in place is what it should be. You know, if the local levels where a crime was committed, and this is kind of the old sheriff in me speaking too, those are the jurors who come from that area, unless they were brought in from somewhere else. But it was in that county, that place. If that county decides, hey, we made a mistake or we think we did wrong here, then they should have first stake in it. You know, for a governor to be able to be in that position, I don't know the situation at the time other than what the paperwork that comes in. But if you got a prosecutor up there that says, hey, I made a mistake, you got a judge up there that says, hey, I made a mistake, or it just wasn't a good case, then that's what that process was set up for. But you know, somebody's got to take the responsibility one way or the other on this. You know, are you going to let the guy out or are you not? You know, and he's been tried and he's been convicted under the laws of the state, and right now that's the way I view that. You know, but then again, they've got a law now that they've got an alternative way to do things.
And Jean Peters Baker's a serious prosecutor. I mean, she's a respected person in that field. It seems like she has the weight, if she comes out and wants to use this law, probably fortunate for the state, she's the one trying it first. Because she is a person that is a competent prosecutor. If this process goes through and a judge does let this person out, do you feel like that's what you wanted to see happen when you signed the bill?
I think that's the way the law is, and that's what I've always supported. The law says they can do that. It gives them an opportunity to go down that route for people like this, and I want to say it's kind of a last chance or a second chance for what they did. I think anytime you look at these cases, Scott, the attention will always go to today's time. You know, that's kind of where everything gets wrapped around. You'll hear very few people talking about the victims or what that crime scene looked like or what happened during that time. Who was these people? You know, and I think all of those are important factors when you make decisions like that. Because, you know, I talk to people all the time. We've pardoned people before. I've met them, and, you know, you like the people and everything. But you still have to remember there's victims out there that are part of the process, too. So you have to take everything into consideration.
I've noticed you pardoned more folks than your predecessors. Donald Trump pardoned more folks than his predecessors. Do you think that's an evolving thing amongst Republicans, or do you think that's, if you have a confident leader, he feels confident enough to make those decisions? What do you think makes you feel more comfortable to give folks a chance?
Maybe because I've been in that arena a long time, and I do realize people make mistakes. I don't know that everybody's a hardened criminal out there that's in prison. You know, I think they made terrible choices. Some of them did. They've made mistakes. I don't know that some of the sentences match because they're all over the board. Let's face it. You know, it depends what judge you're in, what county you're from. You know, somebody that commits a crime in St. Louis is definitely going to be treated differently than somebody that gets a crime in Lafayette County, you know, or wherever that might be as far as the sentencing structure goes. So I think it's important you go back and look at all those things. You look at something that happened 20 years ago versus what's going on today. I remember one time in a marijuana case early on in my career when a guy was growing marijuana, you know, and he goes into a jury trial. He's in there 30 minutes. It's over with, and he gets a 20-year sentence. You know, that's just the way it was. You wouldn't get that today if you tried. But I think the point of it is you got to kind of think through things through that. So, you know, there's lots and lots of people sitting out there wanting to be able to be pardoned, wanting to be able to get their executions. You know, you just got to look at all those cases and kind of match them up. You know, if a guy got a 20-year sentence 20 years ago, you know, maybe he does need to be time to be let out for whatever reason. You know, but those are all decisions you make as governor. So we want to, I guess the point I want to tell you and the listener, we take that very seriously. Our legal team goes through this. They bring people in here and says, hey, take a look at these, and that's what we do. And we try to keep moving that forward.
So you've got, you know, you hear folks talk about crime, especially in St. Louis, Kansas City, big problems. Maybe the best crime prevention is better than cops even, is a job. And I read where Missouri is now at the top of the site selection list. How'd we get there?
Yeah, I think it goes back to workforce development infrastructure, and we're talking about things. If you really want to change the crime rate, Scott, in the state of Missouri, if you want to change the health care, first of all, you're going to have somebody that understands it's a long-term project, and it's going to start with a kid. That's the only way you're going to do it. You're going to have to make sure in early childhood development, whatever you want to call the program, it doesn't matter, but you got to figure out how do you get a kid in a classroom setting to give them an education, and how do you know, and be able to be honest with them and say, look, you're probably not college material, or you've got alternatives to go to college. You need to go in the workforce. We have spent a tremendous amount of time and resources making sure a high school student knows what the workforce of tomorrow is.
I mean, you can make a better living for your family a lot of times going to Rankin Tech than a lot of college degrees.
Well, certainly. I mean, you can go to OTC, you can go, well, you've seen just Rankin in Columbia. We were up there this week where they're partnering up with the schools in the community to get that education environment to those high school kids to get them exposed to that. And you're exactly right. I met a kid down in Poplar Bluff at a trailer manufacturing place down there that makes trailers down there. Yeah, and kids sitting there at a terminal running robotic welders making $65,000 a year. Yeah.
Well, that's good living in Poplar Bluff, I can tell you.
It's a good living anywhere in the state of Missouri if you can start off like that. And he's an OTC graduate, I believe, at the time. You know, it's been several years ago, but I think that's the kind of stuff that we're doing, and we're really doing it right, and we're making sure people know that, and that's why we're getting those rankings of that.
I saw you put the flags at half-staff this past week. Representative Tom Hannigan passed away. Yeah. You knew Tom. Tell folks about him.
Yeah, you know what? Anytime you lose somebody suddenly like that, and somebody like Tom, if you didn't know Tom, and I'm not a guy that knew Tom real well, but every time I knew him, the guy had the right frame of mind as a public servant. He was happy. He was thankful to be doing what he was doing, and he was proud of what he was doing, you know? And, you know, take all the politics aside and all the scuttlebutt that you hear about everything, the guy was just a good guy, you know, doing his job like everybody else.
And happy about it.
And that's just the way you need to evaluate somebody like that. I told Scott the other day when I was up there, you know, and some of his family members, you know, my hat's off to anybody that's willing to put their name on the line in any situation, no matter who you are, and go through the political process and open yourself up to that and from every angle. And I think Tom did that. I think his heart was a public servant's heart. He was a servant's heart. And I think he's going to be missed because I think he's one of those type of guys that uses a little common sense. Yeah. Not radical. He's not looking to cause trouble up here, not looking to make a name for himself. What appeared to me, he just wanted to come up here and serve the people of his district and do good things for the state of Missouri.
Well, that's a question I always ask you. You know, to me, this vaccine's been available to everyone for a very long time now. It's hard for me to get my head around if you haven't taken it yet without you seeing someone really get sick. It's going to motivate you, but you said there are still people getting vaccinated. Yeah. I've got a mom in West Butler County, Terry Faughn, the most stubborn lady you'll ever meet in your life. What do I tell her at Thanksgiving? How do I tell her, hey, Mom, maybe now you ought to try it. Give me some help.
I think you just tell people you don't know what the facts are. Tell them to talk to their doctors, tell their family members. We're all in the position right now, even in my own personal family, where we've had the situation where part of my family was saying, hey, I don't want to be vaccinated at all. Well, they
you
get
couldn't
COVID
even twist the arm?
And all that. No, I didn't. I don't do that. You know, they're big boys and big girls. But, you know, all of a sudden somebody gets sick and they end up in a hospital and all of a sudden it changes your mind. We all know somebody that's went through that situation. Or we know somebody that's lost their lives. But again, the people need to understand. They need to decide that for them. You know, we don't need to mandate your mom to go take a vaccine. Your mom's been a public servant for a long time, you know, as far as a mom goes and who she is. She wants to take a vaccine, take a vaccine. We just don't need to be mandating people to do it. We're on the right track here. We just need to stay the course, and we just need everybody to stay out of this mandate situation. And I'll say this about the mandate, Scott, it's just I know time-wise here. What is so frustrating for me is for somebody that's been on the front lines, whether they're a hospital worker, whether they're a convenience store worker, whether they were in the grocery stores, they're in the heat of a pandemic when nobody else wanted to come out. A lot of CEOs didn't want to go to work. A lot of people want to stay at home, and I get that, and I understood that. But all of a sudden now we're going to tell these people you're not worthy of keeping your job. When you've been through the storm, when you've been through the battles, people need to take a serious look to see, hey, what are we doing here? You know, and if they're not giving them some sort of alternatives to keep their jobs, that would be my message to the private sector. You need to think through this before you start firing people in multiple numbers.
Governor, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you, Scott.
We will be back with you next week on This Week in Missouri Politics from the studios in St. Louis.
This Week in Missouri Politics, sponsored by the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts, Spire, and Sterling Bank.